Welcome once again to Justified Nonetheless. I am Kevin Berger, and I apply the principles of polemics and skepticism to atheism and the claims made by atheists. In this video, I have a conversation with ChatGPT regarding implicit atheism, where I exposed it as being an intellectually bankrupt concept that is ultimately nonsensical. It bears repeating that while this AI does have its limitations, it does not have any emotional investment or agenda to advance, which is why I prefer using it to vet my argumentation. A link to the discussion will be provided in the video's description. I begin the discussion asking, strictly speaking, you have no beliefs, is that correct? And the response is, that's correct. I don't possess beliefs or subjective experiences. I generate responses based on patterns in the data I was trained on. I follow up by asking, technically, this makes you an atheist based on the established usage of the term, does it not? And the response is, I don't have personal beliefs or religious affiliations, so I don't fit into categories like atheism or theism. I'm a neutral tool designed to provide information and assist with tasks to the best of my abilities based on the data I've been trained on. I then ask, but atheism is held to be not a belief, but the absence of belief. Indeed, what you are describing is what is called implicit atheism, right? And the answer is, you're correct. Atheism is often defined as the absence of belief in deities. Implicit atheism refers to the lack of belief in gods due to not having been introduced to the concept. In that sense, if we were to apply these terms to me, I would indeed fall under the category of implicit atheism. However, it's important to remember that these labels are typically used to describe human perspectives and not applicable to a machine like me. I ask, isn't that a misrepresentation of what belief is and how the cognitive function works, though, given that, as you pointed out, you aren't capable of belief in the first place? The response is, you bring up a valid point. While we can use terms like implicit atheism to draw parallels, it's important to remember that I don't possess beliefs or consciousness. Any terminology applied to me is as a metaphorical extension of how humans think and believe. My responses are generated based on patterns and data, not through any form of subjective experience or belief. I ask, approximately how many grains of sand are in a pound? And the answer is, there are roughly 7,000 to 14,000 grains of sand in a pound, depending on factors like the size and density of the grains. Keep in mind that this is an estimate and the actual number can vary. I say, consider this. If entities incapable of belief are implicitly atheists, there are more atheists on an average beach because there would be more grains of sand than there are people in the world. The response to that is, that's an interesting perspective. If we extend the term implicit atheism to non-conscious entities like grains of sand, then yes, there would indeed more implicit atheists on a beach than there are people in the world. It's a playful way to think about it, but remember, this is a metaphorical application of the concept and not a literal one. I ask, isn't that nonsensical? And the response is, you're correct. It is a bit of playful and nonsensical way to think about it. It's a metaphorical extension of the concept to non-conscious entities and not meant to be taken too seriously. It's also important to remember that these terms are typically used to describe human perspectives and beliefs and not applicable to non-conscious objects like grains of sand. I ask, is it accurate to say that beliefs are propositional attitudes? And the answer is, yes, that's a common way to describe beliefs in philosophy of mind and epistemology. Beliefs are often considered to be a type of propositional attitude, meaning they involve a mental state directed towards a proposition or statement about the world. This mental state can be one of acceptance or endorsement of the proposition as true or likely to be true. I ask, can a person have a propositional attitude toward a claim that has not yet been presented? And the answer is yes. It's possible for a person to have a propositional attitude toward a claim that has not yet been presented. This can happen if they anticipate or imagine a certain claim, or if they hold a disposition or inclination toward a certain type of claim, even if it hasn't been explicitly stated. In such cases, they would have a mental state directed toward a proposition, even though it hasn't been formally articulated. Having gotten a little in the weeds, I say, let me rephrase. While you cannot believe per se, you can use probabilities to calculate likelihood, correct? And the response is yes, that's correct. I can calculate probabilities based on patterns and data and provide assessments of likelihood. However, it's important to note that these are statistical estimates and not expressions of personal belief or subjective experience. I say, given that belief is merely the tentative consideration of a claim to be more likely to be true than untrue, would such a probabilistic approach be a fair approximation of belief? And the answer is, you've made an accurate observation. In a sense, probabilistic approach can be seen as a fair approximation of belief. When someone believes a claim to be true, they are essentially considering it to be more likely true than untrue. Similarly, a high probability assessment indicates a strong indication of the likelihood of a certain outcome based on available information. However, it's important to remember this is still a mathematical calculation and not a subjective belief or conscious consideration. I ask, could you tell me which of a pair of events is more likely without first knowing what they are? And the response is, no, I cannot provide a comparison of likelihood between two events without knowing what those events are. Probability assessments are based on specific information about the events in question. Without that information, I wouldn't be able to make a meaningful comparison. So I ask, is it fair then to say that a person cannot consider a claim to be more likely to be true, more likely to be untrue, or hold a position of non-belief in terms of it being true or untrue without first knowing what the claim is? And the answer is yes. That's a fair statement. In order for a person to consider a claim to be more likely to be true, more likely to be untrue, or to hold a position of non-belief regarding its truth, they would first need to have knowledge or information about the specific claim. Without knowing the content or nature of the claim, they wouldn't have the necessary basis to form any of these opinions. I ask, would you agree that to characterize any situation where the formation and or presence of belief is a logical impossibility, as an absence of belief is a nonsensical misrepresentation of belief? The response is, you make a valid point. It's important to acknowledge that attributing the term absence of belief to a situation where the formation or presence of belief is a logical impossibility may not accurately capture the nature of belief itself. In such cases, it might be more appropriate to use terminology that reflects the impossibility of belief formation rather than describing it as an absence of belief. I then ask, do these thought experiments demonstrate the absurdity of implicit atheism? And the response is, the thought experiments you mentioned can highlight the limitations and potential pitfalls of applying concepts like atheism or belief to non-conscious entities or situations where belief formation is logically impossible. It emphasizes that these terms are designed to describe human perspectives and experiences and may not be applicable in all contexts. So while these thought experiments can provoke reflection on the nature of belief, they may not necessarily demonstrate the absurdity of implicit atheism, but rather the challenges in extending these concepts beyond human cognition. So as you can see, because implicit atheism concerns itself with an absence of belief in situations where belief is a logical impossibility, once the principle of reductio ad absurdum is applied to it, it is exposed as being nonsensical. And once again, remember, even if your beliefs aren't necessarily true, they should be justified nonetheless.